Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows. Welcome to part 2 of my hollow limb bow build-along. Well, first off, I'd like to apologize for how long it's taken me to get this second part up. I know some of you have been asking when I'm going to get it out, and it was due to a couple of unfortunate circumstances. The first problem was I had an issue with the original bow that I was using for the project. I had some ring delamination in the stave that kind of cropped up a little bit later in the process. For whatever reason, in the tree there was two rings that didn't bind together, and it ultimately meant that stave just didn't want to become a bow. And so that was my first setback. I picked up another similar stave and I got to work making a bow and bringing it back to the same place so I could pick up where I left off. And I did. I had filmed quite a bit of the second video, and then for some reason that I'm not sure why, I lost the footage that I had done. And so now I'm at a point where I've got a bow in process, but I'm a little further along than where we left off in the last video. And so I do apologize. There's going to be a bit of a gap in the process. But I feel like that's okay, really, because a lot of what makes the hollow limb design unique happens in that design and roughing out stage. And a lot of the later tillering process is very similar to making a more conventional style bow. And so I'll go over some of what I did and show you on the bow what I'm working with here, and hopefully that will help to bridge that gap and we can pick up where we left off and get this bow finished and hopefully help you guys with your own projects if you're interested in taking this on. Let's take a look and see what we're working with here. So I know when we left off on the last video, the bark was still on. I'd roughed out the hollow limb shape. I had one end that had some reflex and the other that I needed to match. So this stave is obviously a different stave, but similar in a lot of ways. So I did end up, creating a little bit of reflex in the outer limbs. The bark came off. Every type of wood and piece of wood is going to be different in that regard. A lot of types of wood that you'll be working with, may already have the bark off. You may just be removing the bark and working with the first limb. You may be chasing a ring. So all that's going to be dependent on the wood anyway. But on my particular U stave here, I got the bark popped off while I was doing some of the early bending. I'm working with the first layer of sapwood that's right underneath the bark. On this particular bow, the customer wanted a rawhide backing. There's going to be snake skins over that. That's not crucial to making a hollow limb bow. It doesn't need extra protection. That's going to be totally dependent on the type of wood you're using, the weight and draw length that you're trying to get out of it, et cetera, et cetera. You would apply any backings on a hollow limb bow using the same discretion that you would using a more conventional style. So don't feel like you need to put rawhide on your bow just because I have it on this bow. So obviously the handle is a little bit more refined than when we left off last time. So this is a particular handle style that I like to use when I'm doing these U hollow limb bows because it just kind of aesthetically accentuates that contrast between the heartwood and the sapwood. I kind of get this little ridge of sapwood here on the belly side of the handle. But really any handle style that makes sense for your bow can be used. It can be a much more simple small handle. You can do a bigger, taller handle. You got to work with whatever the piece of wood is offering you. Usually these small diameter bows, you're kind of limited in what you can work with handle-wise, but feel free to be creative and don't feel stuck to any one particular design. Now you can see, the hollow kind of cup shape to the handles is becoming more pronounced. This bow is already been braced and bending out to about, I think 18 inches or so on the tillering tree. I'll put it on the tree here in a minute and show you where I'm at with the tillering process. One thing I wanted to note that you'll often find when you're making these hollow limb bows if you think about the sapling or the branch that you're working with, it's always going to be thicker at the base, a wider diameter at the base, and kind of tapering more narrow as it's getting out to the end. So that means that one of your limbs is going to be typically have a higher crown than the other limb, just because the diameter was thicker at the base. And so you'll find, for instance, on my bow, it's this bottom limb just has more of a cup shape, has a higher crown, and the top limb is a little bit less crown on the back, and therefore it's dished out a little bit less on the belly. And you just want to be mindful of that. Don't get obsessed with trying to make them look and seem the same. You're going to want to always match the belly to the back. And so if there's a high crown, you're going to need to have a correspondingly deep concave on the belly. If it's a little flatter on the other limb, then the belly is going to be a little bit flatter too, and that's just going to be the nature of your particular bow. All right, so I've got the bow braced up here. I just wanted to talk about where I'm at with the tiller. When we're building the hollow limb bow, the tillering process is going to feel really similar to building a more conventional style, based on what we're looking for in the overall shape. The side profile of these is going to feel very similar. We just want that nice even bend going out the length of the limb. It's going to depend on whether you've got reflex or not. All of that's going to be the same for a more conventional style. So what I'm working with right now is balancing out the two limbs relative to each other. I like, the shape of this limb looks good by itself. The shape of this limb looks pretty good by itself. But I just want to get them more in line. So the gap that I've got here is about 6 inches, and the gap that I've got over here is about 5 3/4 inches. This is my top limb. I want this gap to be a little bit bigger than this bottom limb. I want to take some scrapes off of the top limb here to weaken it up a little bit so that it's bending just a little bit more than the bottom limb. And once I do that, we'll put it up on the tillering tree. We'll see if the changes that I'm going to make will get us where we want with the balance between the limbs, and then we can see where we're at weight-wise and take a look at how the bow's bending on the tillering tree. So in the last video, we got this hollow shape roughed out using the curved gouge. Now I've smoothed it out with this gooseneck scraper, and I'm really, just like I would with any other bow, I'm using my fingers to feel this transition. I want to be going from thick gradually down to slightly thinner. I don't want any thin spots or thick spots. I just want a nice smooth transition. But we're also going to need to be paying attention to the thickness in this direction too, not just the length of the bow. So in any given spot, you should be able to run your fingers and have it feel pretty consistent all the way across. If you're feeling like one edge is getting really thin, or if you feel like it's super thick in the middle and thin on the edges, those are issues that you're going to need to address. If you find a spot where, okay, it's getting a little bit thin there, this spot's feeling just a little bit thin compared to over here and compared to either side here. So I'm just going to make some little X's along this edge just to remind myself to stay off of that for now and kind of match up the rest of the bow to meet where that's at. It's not significant, but it's noticeable. So I'm going to pay attention to it for now. Otherwise, I like the overall shape of the bend on this limb. The taper feels good. So I can take this gooseneck scraper and, depending on the radius of the concave that you're working with, you're going to want to use a different part of the scraper. I mean, for this particular bow, I'm using this smaller end down here to get what I want, but you may find that this is more appropriate if you've got less of a crown that you're working with. So just use your judgment about what part of the scraper you're using. Another thing that you want to be mindful of is the ridges up here, both in how tall they are and in their relative thickness to each other. Like one thing I'm noticing here is that this ridge is a little bit thinner than over here. And so I'm going to want to correct that by favoring this edge and just taking away some of the thickness over here so that they can be matched. And you may find that as you're going along and tillering, that relative to the thickness of your limb, that these edges are getting kind of tall and probably kind of pointy. So periodically as you're tillering, you're just going to want to take, you know, some kind of rasp and just knock these down to make them feel proportional with the rest of the limb. You're going to be concentrating too much stress along these ridges if they get too high and too thin and too pronounced. So there's no magic formula for how tall they should be or how wide they should be. It's going to really depend on your individual bow. So you're going to have to use your judgment to a certain extent, but just don't let them get too extreme. All right, we've got the bow up here on the tillering tree. The top limb is on the right. That was the limb that I was just working on, trying to get it to match the bottom limb. So we'll see if the wood that I took off got me where I wanted to be. My goal for this bow is 55 pounds at 26 inches. Right now, I'm getting to 55 pounds at 20 inches. About 21 inches. Well, what I'm seeing is, I feel like that top limb on the right is still just a little bit too stiff compared to the bottom limb on the left. It's not a big difference, just a little bit, maybe mostly in the inner third. So I'm just kind of making some mental notes about where I want to take wood off next. Overall, the shape is looking pretty good. I just want to get those limbs balanced out a little bit better before I carry on too much more. One thing that you'll notice when you're putting a hollow limb bow on the tillering tree like this is that from the side, it's going to look really chunky. It's going to look really thick because you're seeing the whole side of that thickness from the top of the crown to the bottom of the ridge. And your eyes aren't really able to take into account the hollowed out nature of the limb, and so it can kind of throw you off at first. It just makes the whole bow seem really thick and chunky, but you just have to remind yourself that it has a different shape that's allowing it to bend like it is. So it's just something that kind of takes some getting used to from a visual perspective. So I'm going to take it back. I'm going to take some more scrapes off the top limb, and I'm going to see if I can get it balanced out. So I did another session of scraping on that top right limb, and now when I pull it out to 55 pounds at 21 inches, I'm liking the overall shape of the bow a lot better. It feels more balanced. I'll measure to see if I've got the positive tiller that I want after I've exercised the bow a little bit here on the tillering tree. But I feel like I'm at a stage now where I can start doing some even wood removal. So for instance, maybe 50 scrapes on both the top limb and the bottom limb, just to start bringing the weight down a little bit so I can creep closer to that 26 inches. Just like I've talked about in other tillering videos, I won't go into it too in depth here, but I like to gain about 1 inch of draw length each time that I do wood removal once I like the way the tiller looks. If there's anything that I want to fix with the tiller, that becomes my primary focus. I just take off wood where I need to get the tiller looking like I want it to, and then only when the tiller's looking as perfect as I can get it, and only then when I get the tiller looking as perfect as I can get it, do I go back to doing some stock wood removal from each limb and trying to gain that inch per session. If anything right now, I feel like in that just coming out of the fades on the top right limb, it feels a little stiff compared to on the bottom limb. So I want to get a little bit more flex there coming out of the handle. And then I feel like I can start taking off some even amounts of wood. So just to check in here with the ruler, I've raised the brace height a little bit. And so on the bottom limb here, it's just shy of 7 inches at the deepest part. And then on the top limb here, it's just shy of 7 inches. So they're even now, which is a better place to be. I think I'd like to get this top limb coming around just a little bit more, and I'm thinking that maybe, when I take this wood out here just outside the fades to get this area bending a little bit more, that I might achieve that goal. So let's see if that works. And feel the thickness gets real thick right in here compared to just out here, whereas it's a little bit more gradual on the bottom limb. So I feel like I just need to take some scrapes out right in here. Let's take a closer look at some of the details here, just so you can get a feel for what my bow's looking like. I've been careful to bring the side walls down as I'm tillering the bow so that they're not getting too high and creating too much stress. The whole goal of this design is to balance out the stress along the width of the bow. And if these walls are too high, I've found that it concentrates too much stress in the center. And I think I've found a good balance with this one. I still need to refine the handle some more and kind of scoop these out a little bit more to look like I want them to. But I've got the general shape that I want with the handle. You can see as I get closer out to the tips, the hollow limb kind of fades and just kind of turns into a normal tip. For aesthetic purposes, I might bring this hollow area out a little bit more. It's not going to really affect anything one way or the other. There's so little happening out here at the tips. As long as they've got the strength that they need, it doesn't really matter. So you can choose to transition that hollow area out into kind of normal tips, or you can carry that hollow limb out all the way to the tips if you want, as long as you're maintaining enough strength and integrity out there. Got my edges nice and rounded over. We want to be careful that we're not having a sharp edge here along the side of our hollow limb. We're trying to avoid concentrating stress. We're trying to spread stress out. And so that's one thing that I do on mine, is just to keep that nice and rounded, just like we would on the back, to prevent splinters raising on the corner of the back side. I don't want to create a place where the compression is going to pinch on the edge. So be mindful of that. And then just always be making sure that you're not leaving one side thin and the other side too thick. Spread that out as much as you can. Follow any nuances that you've got on the back, and use your fingers as your guide. So I've done a couple more sessions of scraping and tillering, checking the tiller on the tree, and I've worked it out. I think last time we looked at it, I was at about 21 or 22 inches at 55 pounds. Now I've got it out to about 55 pounds at 25 inches. just an inch away from my goal. Pretty happy with the shape of the limbs. I think the left side is the top limb, and I'd like to get a little bit more bend out of that. So with my last inch of tailoring, I think I'm going to take a few more scrapes off over there. But otherwise I'm pretty happy with how it looks. So the next step is going to be, tweaking that tiller, getting it out to full draw at 26 inches for this bow, shooting it in, and then I can do the little things like refining the handle a little bit more, sanding it up and that sort of thing. And then I'll show you where we're at, and I'll do a full draw with me drawing it by hand, because I feel like that's always a little bit more valuable at this stage than looking at it on the tillering tree. So just the last couple steps here, just kind of refining this fade area. This is largely aesthetic. Your handle doesn't have to look like this. It's the hollow limbs in the working area that really matters. So how you transition to your handle can kind of be up to you. I just kind of wanted to show you how I'm working this area a little bit. Alright, I've got the handle all shaped up just like I want it, and I've got it tillered out to full draw. So I'm just going to draw it by hand here so you can see what the tiller's looking like. Just wanted to give you some close-ups here of how the handle turned out. I'm pretty happy with how it looks. I might tweak it a little bit, but that gives you an idea. So here's the bow overall. All right, here's the first shots out of this bow. Let's see how it goes. Well, I'm really pleased with how it shoots. It's got good arrow speed, no hand shock, real smooth draw. I'm a real fan of how these hollow limb bows look and perform. I'm still new at building these. I'm not an expert. I've only built a handful of them. I've learned with every one of them. So, I hope you can learn from the video that I made here, but have an open mind, and it'll be a learning process for you too. If you have any interesting observations from your own experience that you'd like to share with me, I'd love to learn from you and from your project. Look around and see how other people are doing it too. It's an interesting concept. I don't feel like I've totally wrapped my mind around it yet, but I'm impressed with what I've seen so far, and I intend to make some more. So I hope you have good luck with your projects. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was helpful.